The night sky over Earth was quiet, too quiet. On every continent, people had heard the rumors, whispers of an alien fleet, massive and deadly, headed straight for Earth. But no one knew exactly when they would arrive. Some believed the stories were just that, stories. Until the moment came. It started with a strange light, a bright red flash that lit up the sky. At first, people thought it was just a meteor or maybe a strange weather event. But then it grew, and it didn't fade. It moved. In every major city, from New York to Tokyo, people stepped outside, gazing up at the sky. The news began reporting something they'd never imagined would happen. An alien armada moving through the stars, headed straight for Earth. Across the globe, panic spread like wildfire. The world had heard rumors for years that aliens might come, but no one had expected it to be this real. The armies of Earth had tried to prepare. Fortresses were built, weapons tested, strategies formed. But none of that mattered now. This wasn't just another enemy. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and far outmatched. The fleet was enormous, covering the sky in a way that made even the bravest soldiers tremble. The aliens were silent as they entered Earth's orbit. They didn't speak over communications. They didn't send messages demanding surrender. They simply watched from above, their fleet hanging over the planet like a cloud of doom. The alien ships were unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Massive structures, dark and sleek, their shapes far too strange to be anything from Earth. The largest of them was a city-sized ship, its surface dotted with strange, glowing symbols. The people of Earth had seen this before in movies, heard stories of invaders from other worlds. But nothing prepared them for the cold, dead silence that filled the air now. The cities below grew quiet too, the kind of quiet you feel in your bones. The kind of quiet that tells you something terrible is about to happen. Governments scrambled, sending messages to the United Nations. Military forces were put on alert, but no one knew what to do. How could they? The aliens had never attacked before. But their ships were here to stay, and they weren't leaving. In the Arctic, deep in a top-secret military facility, a small group of scientists and soldiers were watching the alien fleet with wide eyes. This was it. They had waited years for this day, the day when they would reveal humanity's ultimate weapon. The weapon that, if it worked, could be the one thing capable of stopping the aliens, but no one had been sure it would even work. The weapon was a last resort, something that had never been tested on such a large scale. It was the product of desperate minds who had pushed the boundaries of technology further than anyone ever thought possible. They called it the Genesis device. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't a laser. It was something else. Something that could bend the laws of nature itself. Back in the cities, people were gathering in the streets. Fear was spreading fast. Every hour, the alien fleet grew closer. No one knew their purpose, but everyone knew one thing. They had come to Earth, and they weren't here for peace. The President of the United States addressed the nation. His voice was steady, but his eyes were filled with fear. We are not alone in this universe, and we will not be cowed by these invaders. We fight or we die together. This is our home. We stand together as one Earth, one people. His words were powerful, but they didn't do much to calm the nerves of the people who were glued to their televisions. The unknown was terrifying. Some believed Earth had no chance against such advanced technology. Others felt a burning desire to fight back, to prove that humanity wasn't just another victim in the universe. Whatever the emotion, everyone felt it. Fear, anger, hope. Across the world, people were preparing. In some places, families were gathering in bunkers, stockpiling food and water. In others, soldiers were readying weapons, tightening their grip on the last bit of control they had over the situation. In the Arctic, the team watching the alien fleet understood something that no one else did. The Genesis device was ready, but its true power wasn't just a weapon. It was a force of nature, one that could disrupt the very fabric of reality itself. But what they didn't know was whether it would work, or if it would destroy them all. Meanwhile, the aliens did nothing. They just hovered in place, their ships as still as statues. They hadn't moved since they first arrived. It was almost as if they were waiting for something. The world waited too. As the tension built, no one knew if humanity had enough time. The aliens' ships were already in orbit. If the Genesis device didn't work, Earth would fall. And then a strange signal came through on every military channel. It was a message, a short burst of static, followed by a chillingly simple phrase in a language no one had ever heard before. The words echoed through the world's communication systems, sending a cold chill down the spine of anyone who listened. "We know what you've done." The words hung in the air, thick with mystery. Was this a threat, a warning, or something else entirely? The world held its breath. The first shot of the war hadn't even been fired, and already everything had changed. In that moment, humanity realized that this wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a battle for something much bigger, something they didn't understand yet. And they had no choice but to face it, together. The world's eyes were locked on the sky, where the alien fleet hung like a dark shadow over Earth. With every passing moment, the tension grew thicker. People on the streets stared upwards in a mix of fear and disbelief. News anchors tried to keep their voices steady as they repeated updates. But their words were drowned out by the distant sound of sirens, helicopters, and military jets scrambling into position. In the Arctic, deep inside a secret military base that no one knew about, a group of engineers and soldiers watched the screen nervously. The alien fleet hovered above Earth, almost as if waiting for something that only they knew. For years, this remote base had been the site of one of humanity's most ambitious and dangerous projects. The weapon, known as the Genesis device, was humanity's final hope, hidden away from the world, buried beneath layers of secrecy. The idea behind the weapon had come from desperation, born out of the realization that if the aliens ever attacked in full force, no one would survive. No existing weapon, no army, no defense could stand up to such an advanced, ruthless force. But the Genesis device was no ordinary weapon. It wasn't a bomb or a laser or a simple military tool. It was something different, a force of nature, a machine built to bend the very laws of physics. Something that could manipulate energy itself. Something that could change the battlefield in ways no one could predict. The device had been designed to take the fight to the aliens in ways no one had ever imagined. It was capable of manipulating gravity, creating black holes, distorting time and space, and even shifting the very elements of nature. But for all its power, it had never been tested in real combat. Now the time had come. The team of engineers, led by Dr. Naomi Reyes, stood at the control center, watching the screens. Sweat dripped down their faces as they worked. There was no going back. The Genesis device had been activated, its massive core humming with power. A low, throbbing sound filled the room, vibrating through their bones. The machine was alive. Naomi checked the readings on her screen. The device was online, but she hesitated. "Is it ready?" someone asked from behind her. It was Captain James Carter, the head of security at the base. His face was pale, his eyes tired, but his voice was steady. Naomi didn't look away from the screen. She swallowed hard before speaking. "It's alive, but we haven't tested it under these conditions before. We don't know what it will do. It might just..." Before she could finish, a deep, resonant sound echoed through the control room, and the ground beneath them shook. It was like a giant heartbeat. The Genesis device, a towering structure of metal and unknown technology, began to glow. At first, it was just a faint light, like a distant star flickering to life. But then the light grew stronger. The air in the room crackled with static. A strange energy filled the space, as though reality itself was being stretched, bending around the machine. Then suddenly, the device released a pulse, a shockwave of energy that rippled outwards from the base. It was nothing like anything anyone had ever seen before. It spread through the atmosphere, reaching into the sky. For a split second, the air seemed to shimmer like a mirage before everything went still again. Out in space, the alien fleet had been watching. They had been waiting. But now something had changed. The air around their ships began to flicker, like the surface of water disturbed by an unseen hand. The alien ships trembled, their engines sputtering for a brief moment. It was subtle, but it was enough to send a ripple of confusion through their ranks. "Did you feel that?" one of the alien commanders asked, his voice a low, distorted hum in his language. His ship's sensors were going haywire, unable to properly analyze the strange anomaly that was spreading through space. Inside their flagship, a massive vessel with a gleaming black surface, the leaders of the alien fleet gathered. Their dark, reptilian eyes narrowed as they studied the data that appeared on their screens. What they were seeing made no sense. The device, the Genesis device, had done something to their ships, something that no technology in the galaxy could explain. The commander turned to his second-in-command. "What is this? What have they done?" The second-in-command's fingers danced across a series of holographic controls, trying to analyze the energy signature. It's not like anything we've encountered. Their technology, it's alive. It's not just a weapon. It's a force, a creation. The commander's eyes narrowed. "Keep the fleet in position. We will wait and observe. This is no ordinary human technology. They have something new, something dangerous." Back on Earth, in the control room beneath the Arctic ice, Naomi and her team were holding their breath. The Genesis device had activated, but they still didn't know if it would be enough. Suddenly the screen flickered. The energy readings coming from the device were spiking, growing out of control. Naomi's heart raced as she stared at the numbers flashing on her screen. "We need to shut it down," Carter said, his voice tense. "It's too powerful. If we don't—" Naomi shook her head. "We can't stop it now. It's too late. If we turn it off, we'll lose the chance to stop them. We have to let it run its course." For better or for worse, a deep silence fell over the room. The fate of Earth, of humanity, now rested on a machine that had never been tested, on a force they barely understood. In the sky above, the alien fleet continued to watch. They were waiting, unsure of what was coming next, but deep inside the Arctic base, the real battle had already begun. The Genesis device was alive, and it was reaching out to the stars. The quiet had returned to the world, well, at least on the surface. The alien fleet hovered over Earth like an inescapable shadow. The silence between humanity and the invaders was thick and suffocating, but in the underground control centers, in the cold mountains of the Arctic, things were far from still. The hum of the Genesis device still rang in the ears of those who had activated it. The machine was alive, but no one knew for how long. It had been hours since the pulse went out. The alien ships seemed to be waiting, watching. Their senses were trying to understand the anomaly in space, but every attempt to analyze the strange energy proved fruitless. The fear in their ranks was growing. This wasn't supposed to happen. Back on Earth, the world was holding its breath. The United Nations called an emergency session, with leaders from across the globe sitting in tense silence. Every country, every government had prepared their forces for an attack they couldn't stop. But now there was something else to consider. The Genesis device, the weapon that had never been tested. Its power was unimaginable, but so was its unpredictability. Would it work? Would it tear Earth apart instead of saving it? No one knew, but humanity had no choice. They had to believe. President Evelyn Harris stood at the front of the room, her voice steady, though her heart raced. "We've come to a decision. The Genesis device is our last chance. The alien fleet is waiting, and they're not going to leave until they've finished what they started. We have to give it everything we have." Around her, murmurs of agreement filled the room. There was no other option. The survival of humanity rested on the shoulders of a machine whose potential was still shrouded in mystery. In the Arctic, Naomi Reyes stood before the Genesis device, her eyes wide with concern as the energy levels spiked again. Something had changed. The machine was becoming more aggressive. The pulse earlier was just the beginning. It was reacting to the presence of the alien ships, as if it was aware of their threat. Captain Carter, Naomi said, her voice filled with urgency. It's accelerating. It's not just creating energy anymore. It's shaping the environment around us. I think it's creating a gravity field. Carter's eyes darted from the screens to the machine, then back to Naomi. What does that mean? Will it pull us in? Will it? I don't know, Naomi snapped. But it's affecting everything. We have to act now, or we might lose control of it. Outside, the winds had begun to pick up. The vast, frozen landscape shook as if the earth itself was preparing for something. The control room's lights flickered in rhythm with the pulses from the Genesis device. Everyone in the room felt the pull in their stomachs, like a deep, low rumble inside the earth. Meanwhile, above the planet, the alien fleet still held its position. They had detected the increased energy readings and were trying to make sense of it. But even their most advanced technology couldn't understand what they were facing. Something had triggered their fear, something that had never been seen before in the galaxy. Commander, they're moving, the second-in-command reported from the observation deck, his voice trembling. It's like they're preparing to... The commander interrupted him, his voice dark and cold. Prepare to engage the enemy. We will not be intimidated by a primitive device. Their weapon is nothing compared to the strength of the United Federation. The commander's words were confident, but the unease was clear in his eyes. The Federation's fleet had faced the mightiest of galactic civilizations, and no weapon had ever forced them to hesitate. This device on Earth, however, was different. They couldn't risk it. Back on Earth, Naomi gave a final glance at the control screens. The Genesis device had been activated, but it wasn't just a weapon anymore. It was something more. It was pulling energy from the planet itself, something she hadn't expected. The device's core was drawing power from the Earth's magnetic field, amplifying its force. Every pulse sent shockwaves across the planet's crust, making the Earth shudder. This is it, Naomi said under her breath. Either this works, or we die. A voice over the loudspeaker interrupted her thoughts. The military is in position. We've received word from the President. The Genesis device will be launched in 5 minutes. 5 minutes. The countdown had begun. Naomi's heart beat louder than the hum of the device. She turned to Captain Carter, who nodded, his expression hardening. There was no turning back now. Outside, the sky had darkened. The alien fleet was still unmoving, but they were preparing. They knew the Earth had something they had never expected. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a force of nature, and they had to stop it. The command was given. With a deep, resounding thrum, the Genesis device began to release its energy in full force. The entire base shook, and the ground beneath them cracked open. Waves of gravitational force rippled through the atmosphere. Time seemed to warp. The stars above the alien fleet flickered in and out of focus, as though reality itself was bending. And then, for the first time since the fleet had arrived, the alien ships began to move, faster than they had before, as though trying to escape the growing pull of the device. Their engines roared to life, but they couldn't shake the gravitational forces the Genesis device was creating. Inside the command center, the team stared at the screens in disbelief. "It's working," Naomi whispered. "It's actually working." But as the energy continued to surge, something unexpected happened. The alien fleet began to fight back. A bright flash of light exploded from one of their ships, and the energy readings on Naomi's screen spiked. "They're firing back!" Carter shouted. The Genesis device wasn't just altering gravity, it was warping the environment around them, and the aliens had figured out how to counteract it. The air in the room thickened as the battle between Earth's final hope and the alien invaders began in earnest. But the fight had just started, and no one knew who would survive. The air was thick with tension, both on Earth and above it. In the Arctic control room, the hum of the Genesis device reverberated through the walls, sending tremors of power through the cold base. Naomi Reyes stood at the center, her hands gripping the console as she monitored the device's escalating energy output. Every second, every pulse of the device seemed to shake the Earth itself, warping the air and distorting the skies. The alien fleet had responded. Their ships, once hovering ominously above Earth, were now retreating, but not in a simple, orderly fashion. They were scrambling, flying erratically, as though trying to escape something far worse than the destruction they could rain down upon humanity. The graceful, deadly ships, with their sleek designs, now appeared clumsy and uncertain. Naomi watched, wide-eyed, as the alien fleet's movements became more erratic. Ships started pulling back, as if they were desperately trying to break free of the force that was pulling them down. "Captain Carter!" Naomi shouted. "They're moving out of position. They're running!" Carter's face grew pale as he turned toward her, his voice barely a whisper. "No, it can't be. They're supposed to be the most advanced species in the galaxy. They've never shown fear before." Naomi's mind raced. She had never seen anything like this. The Genesis device had activated something in the fabric of space itself, something the aliens had never encountered. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a force of nature, one that disrupted the laws of physics and altered the environment around them. The aliens were terrified because they had no idea how to fight back. But it wasn't just the fleet that was running. The very leaders of the alien fleet, the highest command, were gathering in their flagship, the massive city-sized ship that hovered in the center. They had lost their calm, their confidence. Fear had taken hold. Inside the flagship, Commander Zalor, a towering reptilian figure, stood at the center of the war room. His eyes glowed faintly as he scanned the readings. His species, the Verin, were known for their cold, logical nature. They had conquered dozens of worlds, reduced civilizations to dust, and left no trace of their enemies. But now, staring at the data flashing before him, Zalor was struggling to maintain that same composure. "How is this possible?" Zalor growled, his voice low and deadly. "Their technology is primitive. This device, it's not just a weapon, it's alive, it's twisting space, it's breathing." His second-in-command, a smaller but no less formidable figure named Ithra, stared at the readings, his face twisted with confusion and fear. "We cannot fight this. Our shields are destabilizing. Their gravitational pull is tearing through our systems." Zalor clenched his fists, his claws digging into the metallic surface of the command table. "We need answers, now." "All attempts to counteract the gravity waves have failed," Ithra reported. "It's altering the entire battlefield. I don't believe it's a weapon. They're using the planet itself." Zalor's heart raced with the realization. The humans had done something no one in the galaxy thought was possible. They had found a way to manipulate the very forces of the universe, something even the Verin had never attempted. And now they were feeling the consequences. The alien fleet, once poised to annihilate Earth, was now spiraling into chaos. Ships collided with each other, their navigation systems fighting to adjust to the unexpected warping of space and time. Panic spread throughout their ranks as they realized the true scale of the threat they were facing. Back on Earth, the feeling of uncertainty wasn't much different. Inside the control room, Naomi had never felt more alive, and yet more terrified. The Genesis device was responding to the presence of the aliens, amplifying its power with every passing moment. Waves of gravitational energy rippled out from the machine, affecting not only the alien ships, but also the atmosphere around them. Even the ground beneath the base felt unstable. "It's getting worse," Naomi said, her voice shaking. "If we keep this up, the whole planet will—" "What are you saying?" Carter interrupted, his tone sharp. "We can't stop now. We've come too far." "I know," Naomi replied, biting her lip. "But we might not have much time. The energy levels are climbing faster than we predicted. If the device keeps amplifying this way, we risk losing control. It could tear the planet apart." The room fell into a stunned silence. Everyone knew the risks, but they also knew that if the Genesis device didn't work, the alternative was far worse. Humanity's last stand would mean nothing if the aliens succeeded in their invasion. "Can you reverse it?" Carter asked, his eyes filled with doubt. Naomi shook her head. "Once it's started, there's no way to turn it off. We're in the middle of a chain reaction. It's either win or die." Just then, an alarm blared across the room. The screen in front of Naomi flashed with new readings. The energy coming from the Genesis device was now dangerously unstable. A series of cascading shockwaves began to ripple outward, distorting the magnetic field around the planet. In space, the alien ships began to flicker in and out of existence, their forms warping like distorted reflections in a broken mirror. One by one, the alien ships began to lose control. Their advanced technology, designed to withstand the most extreme conditions, was now being torn apart by the forces humanity had unleashed. Their once proud fleet was crumbling. Naomi looked up at the screen, her eyes wide in disbelief. "They can't escape it," she whispered. "The energy, it's too much. It's pulling them in." In the alien flagship, Zaylor slammed his fists on the control panel. "No, we will not be defeated by them. We will," but his words were cut off as the flagship's shields cracked and failed. The ship's engines sputtered and went dark. The entire fleet was falling into disarray, pulled toward Earth by the unrelenting force of the Genesis device. For the first time, Zaylor, the commander of the Viren fleet, knew what it was like to feel real fear. He had never known defeat. But now, the humans had done something he thought was impossible. They had weaponized nature itself. Back on Earth, the survivors watched in stunned silence as the alien fleet faltered. Ships spun wildly out of control, unable to escape the gravitational distortion. It was happening. Humanity was winning, but at what cost? As the alien fleet faltered, the Genesis device continued to pulse, its energy growing ever stronger. Naomi and her team looked at each other, knowing that the final confrontation wasn't over yet. The real battle had just begun. The chaos in the sky above Earth was palpable. The alien fleet, once poised and confident, was now in disarray. Ships spiraled out of control, their advanced technology unable to cope with the forces the Genesis device was unleashing. It was like watching a swarm of prey caught in a storm, struggling against an unstoppable current. But the battle wasn't over. The Genesis device had become an uncontrollable force of nature, pulling the very fabric of space around it. Naomi Reyes and her team, trapped in the Arctic base, could only watch as their creation, this powerful, unpredictable weapon, wreaked havoc on the invaders. "The fleet is collapsing," Carter said, his voice filled with disbelief as he watched the alien ships on the monitors. "But they're still not retreating. They're not giving up." Naomi's eyes were locked on the screen. Even though the alien fleet was losing control, they were still fighting. Their ships weren't simply retreating, they were fighting back. Small energy pulses erupted from their vessels, their weapons flaring to life for the first time since the Genesis device had activated. "They're adapting," Naomi said, her voice tight with fear. "They're trying to counter the gravitational anomalies. They're not just fleeing, they're preparing for a counterattack." The tension in the control room thickened. The Genesis device was a force like no other, but its power was rapidly spiraling out of control. Naomi's hands flew over the controls, trying to stabilize the energy output, but it was no use. The device was responding to the alien threat in ways no one had predicted. "Can we stop it, and can we reverse it?" one of the engineers asked, panic creeping into his voice. Naomi didn't look up from the screen. "We can't. Once it's begun, it can't be turned off. The device is too unstable now. It's like trying to stop a storm once it's started." The air in the room seemed to thicken, as if the very gravity around them had increased. Naomi could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her, on all of them. The device was winning, but the cost was mounting. Earth was becoming a ticking time bomb, and the alien fleet, though chaotic, still had the firepower to strike back outside the Arctic base. The winds howled as the forces of nature themselves seemed to bend under the influence of the Genesis device. The very ground seemed to tremble, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. "Look," Carter shouted. "They're coming back into formation!" Naomi turned just in time to see the alien ships regrouping. The once disarrayed fleet had begun to fall back into a rough battle formation. They were adjusting to the gravitational distortions. The alien ships had adapted quickly, but there was no doubt they were still being pulled toward Earth. The force of the Genesis device was relentless. "How long until the fleet is in range to attack?" Naomi asked urgently. "Minutes," Carter replied, his eyes darting between the screens. "Maybe 5 minutes. They've adjusted their trajectory. They're preparing for a direct assault." Fear shot through Naomi's chest. She could feel the weight of every decision she had made leading to this moment. The Genesis device was powerful, too powerful, but had humanity's victory already come at too high a price? Up in space, the Varian fleet's commander, Zalor, was still fighting to regain control of his ship. His flagship, the largest and most imposing ship in their fleet, was now crippled but still operational. The gravitational forces had caused massive damage to their shields, engines, and weapon systems. And yet, despite the damage, Zalor's resolve remained unbroken. "We are Varin," Zalor growled, his eyes glowing like burning embers. "We do not bow to primitive threats." At his command, the flagship powered forward. It was a desperate gamble, but it was their only option. The alien fleet, though damaged, still had firepower. They would strike back and destroy humanity's last hope if it was the last thing they did. "Prepare the weapons," Zalor ordered. "We will break through. If the device does not fall, we will make it fall." His voice carried the weight of centuries of conquest. And now it carried the weight of an empire facing its greatest defeat. Zalor's claws tightened on the control panel. His fleet had been crippled, but it was still a fleet of invaders, destroyers, conquerors. And they would not let their invasion of Earth end here. Back on Earth, the countdown to the final assault began. The Genesis device hummed louder now. Naomi could feel the vibrations in her chest as the energy output spiked to new, unheard-of levels. The room shook, and a sharp, shrill alarm pierced the air. It was a warning, one that none of them wanted to hear. Naomi's face went pale as she glanced at the monitor in front of her. "We're at critical levels," she said, her voice tight with panic. "The gravitational field is reaching dangerous levels. If we don't stabilize it now—" "Stabilize?" Carter interrupted, his voice shaking. "It's already unstable. If we try to control it now, we could collapse the entire planet." Naomi turned to him, her eyes full of regret and desperation. "I know, but we have no choice." In those final moments, Naomi knew there was no more time for hesitation. The choice was clear. Either Earth would survive, or it would be torn apart, swallowed by the forces they had unleashed. Outside, the alien ships were closing in. The formation was now steady. Their weapons were charging, and soon they would fire. With one final devastating pulse, the Genesis device erupted. The blast of energy ripped through the atmosphere, a wave of force that consumed everything in its path. The earth trembled, and the skies above were filled with flashes of light. As if the very heavens were being torn asunder, the alien fleet, still too close to escape the device's gravitational pull, was hit head-on by the shock wave. Their shields cracked under the strain, their systems overloaded. Some ships, unable to withstand the intensity of the field, began to disintegrate. Others were dragged toward Earth, unable to break free of the gravitational force that had become a part of the planet's very core. And then, as if the world held its breath, the Genesis device unleashed its final, desperate attack, a concentrated gravitational wave that collapsed inward. Toward the center of the Earth, the alien fleet, the final remnants of their massive force, were now caught in the planet's grip. The final deadly wave crushed the fleet's remaining strength. There was a blinding flash, a deafening silence, and then nothing. For a brief, terrifying moment, Naomi and her team thought it was over. But as the dust settled, they saw the unthinkable. The alien fleet, what was left of it, had disappeared. Only shattered remains floated in the vacuum of space and Earth. Earth had survived, but the cost was heavy. Naomi stumbled backward, exhausted, her body shaking. The Genesis device was silent now, its power spent, but the room was still shaking. The planet beneath them seemed to groan, as if it too had felt the strain of the battle. Naomi closed her eyes, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The world was saved, but the future was uncertain. "We did it," Carter whispered, his voice filled with awe. "We actually did it," but Naomi knew. The victory was not without a price. Humanity had won, but at the edge of oblivion. The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment it felt like time had frozen. The storm of chaos, the violence of the battle had ended, and yet the world was still trembling. Naomi Reyes stood in the control room of the Arctic base, her eyes glued to the main screen, watching the aftermath unfold on Earth and in space. The Genesis device had worked, but at what cost? The alien fleet, once a powerful and terrifying force, had been reduced to debris. Their ships, mangled and torn apart by the brutal forces of the Genesis device, floated motionless in the vast emptiness of space. Some were broken into fragments, others had disappeared entirely. Consumed by the gravitational pull of Earth's now altered magnetic field, "We did it," Naomi whispered, though the words felt hollow, as if the weight of the victory was too heavy to bear. She looked around at the faces of her team, faces that mirrored her own exhaustion, but also something else. Fear. A fear of the unknown. "We did it," Carter repeated, but his voice trembled. "But I don't understand how. How did it all end so suddenly?" Naomi could only shake her head. She didn't have the answers. The Genesis device had worked, yes, but the planet had been pushed to its limits. What remained was a world that had been changed, altered at a fundamental level, and no one knew what the future would hold. The device was silent now, its energy spent, but the scars it left were not just in the sky above Earth. They were in the very heart of the planet. Outside the control room's thick walls, the wind had died down, but there was an eerie stillness that had settled over the Earth. It was as if the world was holding its breath, recovering from the trauma of what had happened. The snow in the Arctic had turned a dull grey, as if it too was mourning the destruction, the cost of their victory. In space, the Virin flagship drifted, now a twisted wreck, its once glorious form barely holding together. Zalor, the commander of the fleet, was among the few survivors. He and a handful of his officers had managed to survive the blast, but their ship was beyond repair. Their weapons were destroyed. Their engines had sputtered out. The final gravitational wave from the Genesis device had torn apart not only their fleet, but the very heart of their invasion force. Zalor's mind raced with fury, but also a strange, bitter awe. The humans had done something he never thought possible. They had tapped into the primal forces of the universe and won. He had underestimated them, and now the Virin Empire would pay the price. "Prepare a signal," Zalor said, his voice raspy. "We are not finished here. We will return." His officers exchanged uncertain glances, knowing that they had no ships, no resources, and no real hope left. But Zalor's pride and thirst for revenge ran deeper than the damage done to their fleet. "We need to make contact with the Empire," Zalor muttered. "We need reinforcements. The humans will pay." Back on Earth, the reality of their survival began to set in. Humanity had won, but the planet had been forever altered. The Genesis device had not just destroyed the alien invaders, it had changed Earth. The gravitational anomalies had wreaked havoc on the planet's ecosystems. The planet's magnetic field had shifted, causing odd weather patterns and strange fluctuations in the planet's core. There were tremors in places that had never seen earthquakes. The sky shimmered with a strange glow, the remnants of the power unleashed by the device. In the control room, Naomi turned away from the screens and faced her team, who were silently processing everything that had happened. "What happens now?" one of the engineers finally asked, his voice hesitant. Naomi's gaze swept over the room, the faces of those who had stood by her through this madness. They had made history, but history had also made them all aware of one terrifying truth. They were now living on the edge. The Genesis device had altered the very fabric of the planet, and though Earth had survived, it was a world that would never be the same. "We rebuild," Naomi said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "But we do it carefully. We have no idea what the full extent of this damage is yet. We need to learn from this and control it. But Naomi knew it wasn't just about rebuilding. It was about understanding. Understanding the Genesis device, its effects on the planet and what might come next. Elsewhere, in the corridors of the United Nations, the leaders of the world had gathered, their faces drawn and grim. The invasion was over, but the war was far from won. The Genesis device had saved them, but the price was steep. The survivors of Earth had to now face the consequences of their actions. President Evelyn Harris stood at the head of the room, staring out the window at the stormy skies above the planet. The stars had been dimmed by the gravitational disturbances, the once immaculate space now a blurred reflection of what Earth had become. "We've survived," she said, her voice steady but heavy. "But humanity must now come together like never before. We've seen what we are capable of, and we've seen the price we've paid. The Genesis device isn't just a weapon, it's a new reality. We don't know what we've unleashed, but we must learn how to control it." Her words hung in the air, and the weight of them was impossible to ignore. Humanity had faced an invader unlike any before, and survived. But at what cost? What had they truly won? In the distant reaches of space, the Varan Empire was already plotting its next move. Their fleet had been shattered, their invasion defeated. But the loss would only fuel their hatred. The humans had defeated them with a weapon they couldn't understand, but the Varan Empire would never forget. They would return, and they would be ready. Back on Earth, as the world slowly began to recover, people moved forward with quiet fear. For all their victory, they knew one truth: this was not the end. The aliens were not gone, and humanity's place in the universe had just been changed forever. As the days passed and the world began to heal, humanity would face new questions, new challenges. The Genesis device had saved them, but it had also opened a door to something far bigger. And the universe, it seemed, had taken notice.